I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Hey, it's Danny Pellegrino from Everything Iconic. Ready to upgrade your style game without blowing your budget? Check out Quince. They've got all the good stuff, shirts and polos, activewear, and fine leather goods, all at 50 to 80% less than other high-end brands. And the best part? They're all about safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Get that luxury vibe without the luxury price tag. Hit up quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. That's quince.com/upgrade.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Duck, goose, or a nice cut of roast mutton? And would Sir like the port or the Sauvignon Blanc with his main? No, I'm not asking what you're planning to have for Christmas dinner. I'm speculating what you might have been served if you'd been to a Waterloo banquet. Tonight, we're going to party like it's 1820, looking at the commemorations around the Battle of Waterloo, how it differed if you were an esteemed duke or a lowly pleb, and how Waterloo celebrations went from being a military shindig to something that had a nationwide and even international appeal. This is Waterloo, a feast fit for a duke, coming up next on the Napoleonic Wars pod. Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod. And as you've heard, a session on Waterloo and the memory of Waterloo, a drum that we've banged a few times on this show, but we're about to bang it again and no apologies will be given. You will not be surprised to hear that I have Dr. Memory, as he's asked me to refer to him in the house. Luke Reynolds, assistant professor at the University of Connecticut, not so recently promoted assistant professor at the University of Connecticut. Congratulations, belatedly, although they need to hurry up and make you like full professor already. Author of Who Owned Waterloo? Battle, Memory and Myth in British History 1815 to 1852. And there's a reason that we are doing this episode today. The paperback of Who Owned Waterloo is out right now. It came out this morning. Go buy it. Get on with it. You've been told. Do so. Luke will probably give you a discount code at the end, so make sure you listen all the way through. There you go. There's your incentive to listen to the entire episode. But if for whatever reason you weren't somebody who went and bought the hardback, it was worth it, but budgets, I understand why you may not have availed yourself. It's out in paperback, people. There is literally zero excuse. Oxford University Press, go sort it out. Luke, great to see you again, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm well, Zach. I am very well, and it's wonderful to be back. Although we're going to forgive you on this one because you are teetotal, and in fairness, I am nearly teetotal as well.
I knew you were going to correct me on the bloody wine choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it should be, is it red wine with red meat? Is that the rule?
Yeah, it's traditionally red wine with red meat, white with
fish.
Chicken and fish.
Yeah.
But the crucial thing is that if you in 18 and the first banquet was 1821, not 1820. But if at any of those banquets you asked for port during the main meal, you probably would have been chucked out, and only if you had asked very nicely would your sword and helmet have come with you.
Yes. Yes, that's true. But let's be honest, with my sword collection, they're not letting me through the door in the first place. It's far too plebeian.
That is very valid. Same here. In fairness, I'm a damn Yankee, so they're not going to let me anywhere near that.
Absolutely, thing. You're one of these ungrateful people who doesn't even like tea. So you know.
Okay, in general, I will take that as a national slur, but you have seen me drink endless cups of tea myself.
That's part of the reason why I said it, just to wind you up. Although I have a question, duck and goose, surely you would serve, don't know why this has suddenly turned into a podcast on appropriate wines to have at dinner. Surely you would have a white wine with the duck or the goose.
So duck and goose are heavier fowl meats. They tend to be sort of gamier. They tend, especially the dark meat side. So my instinct would be a red, probably a lighter red. So like a Pinot Noir rather than something heavy. We are both reaching here, mate. Like neither of our research can cover this one.
This is true. I may actually text a friend over the course of this podcast and see if I get an answer. Sam Jolly will be consulted on what is appropriate as an aperitif to have with your duck and goose. Shall we actually get on and do some history though? Because I guess that's sort of what we're here for.
It's certainly a novel approach.
It is. Actually focusing on what the show's meant to be about. This is something that we'll never catch on this podcast. We said at the start, I would digress from the set list of questions, and your response was as pithy as it was devastatingly accurate. Would you care to repeat?
You shock me.
I know. This show, rabbit holing, what? But let's be unimaginative. Let's go back to the beginning. I tell you what, can we go back to the night of Waterloo itself even? So Wellington gets back well after 10 p.m. I know that he orders toast over the course of the night when he's woken up to be told that Gordon has died. Has a little cry, quite understandably. Orders some toast and a cup of tea, starts writing the Waterloo Dispatch. Do we know any more about what Wellington has actually consumed over the course of the day? Because he's been a quite busy man over the course.
He's been a very busy man. There are various reports of what's in his saddlebags that he's sort of noshing on. There's mentions at some point of a hard-boiled egg or two, which is actually an excellent quick carry source of protein. Although if he wanted to be truly sort of British, it would have been a Scotch egg rather than a regular hard-boiled egg.
Vindication for Scotch eggs. I have had a long-standing debate with the same, said Sam Jolly, incidentally, on the virtues of the humble Scotch egg. And I've been widely condemned as a Philistine for having forthright views on the righteousness of the Scotch egg, because of course it is a sentient being that has its own righteousness. But tell me, what is your stance on the Scotch egg? Seeing as we've gone stupid in terms of this food fixation.
I'm actually not a fan of either form of sort of hand carry egg. I prefer my eggs slightly softer, but I see no reason why the Scotch egg should be dismissed if the hard boiled is not.
That is an admirable save there. I was about to invite you to leave via the nearest exit, although that would be counterintuitive, since then we wouldn't actually have an episode to record. Okay, so Wellington not eating much, perhaps understandably.
And, really grabbing it when he could. And the other thing we have to remember, and this is, at the danger of turning this into a Wellington apology podcast, and God knows there are enough of those out there. But we have to remember that he meets Blücher at La Belle Alliance. He's doing his stuff, and fundamentally the only way he can get back to his headquarters in any time that would allow him to sleep is to go right across this battlefield. And as I've commented, as dozens of scholars, from Alexander Mikabridze down to Richard Holmes down to everyone has made the point, Waterloo is a tight valley. It's contained, and there's a lot of slaughter there. So he really does have to go through the results of his success, and he he's marching through there, and he is hearing screams and cries and things like that. And, especially having gotten very little sleep, I'm pretty sure, and the sort of the adrenaline and relief rushing through him. The man was notoriously iron, but I think he was weaker mentally then, or emotionally, not mentally, emotionally than he has probably ever been.
I mean, you've got to put yourself in that moment, right? Darkness has fallen by that point. So he can pick his way through the highway. There'll have been plenty of people milling about, but you can't see much beyond the highway, but you can hear it. You can hear the whines of the dying horses, the groans of the dying men, people literally calling out with their last words.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, he has to ride back through that carnage whilst contemplating the fact that who's around him? Absolutely nobody, because the entirety of his staff is either dead or wounded, along with a significant proportion of his senior officers. So it's not even as though he can rendezvous and meet up and have a quick sort of shindig with, for example, Picton. What have you got to report? What's your situation? Are you able to move forward? He can't do any of that because half these people are dead. So it's really not surprising that having a 5-course slap-up meal is not a leading priority.
No, it's really not. And I completely understand, having operated basically on adrenaline and what he could fit in his saddlebag. Dry toast and tea makes the most sense. In the modern world, he might have also called for, I don't know, some sort of MRE of chicken soup or something, but it would have been something easily digestible, something like that.
I mean, in a moment like that, you don't particularly want heavy flavors because, well, I can't speak for somebody who's been in combat. So, I'm going to heavily caveat what I'm saying here. But I would imagine that something that's pretty tasteless and bland and doesn't kind of agitate is probably quite...
I mean, this is the thing, right? You're saying, he's coming back on the highway. You can't see what's around him. He can definitely hear it. But also, I would add, he can smell it.
That's a good point.
Battlefields do not smell pleasant. At best, it's saltpeter and gunpowder, and it goes downhill from there really quickly.
Yes, it does. People use your imagination, will avoid being coarse, but it's not nice. Okay, so that's that sort of night of. But Waterloo obviously goes on to become an annual commemoration. Now, the Waterloo Banquet is kind of the second stage in this story, so we'll hold that for a moment. I guess the first question is, how does that transition happen? How do we go from, look, battle has happened, to there's going to be the annual commemoration? Because to my knowledge, I mean, there is now a thing called Traff Night, Trafalgar Night, which may or may not have been celebrated by the Navy. I'm not entirely sure. I would have to speak to naval historians, unless of course you know. But
there's certainly evidence of sort of toasts drunk on ships and things like that. But I have I've seen I haven't done the requisite research to answer this definitively on the civilian level. What I have seen are calls after very successful Waterloo commemorations by newspapers, basically saying, "Let's do this again in October for Trafalgar. This was fun." So there's definitely some people thinking that way.
Okay, so how do we get to that point where people are taking the time to stop on, inverted commas, Waterloo Day and, hey, let's actually have a party? Because that's basically what we're talking about here. My gut is that, look, the army is going to look for excuses to have a booze up, right? You're looking for that opportunity. It's also going to be a somber occasion, particularly in the immediate aftermath. You probably kind of want to focus more on having a good time and toasting your fallen comrades, kind of, inverted commas, honoring them in that way. So how do we get to this? And also, is there kind of a push from the top down? Do you have kind of royalty trying to sort of arc in and latch onto this? Or is this something that just gets driven forwards by the army at a regimental level?
Mm. So I think the first thing we really need to sort of clear up, especially for anyone who is listening to this grinding their teeth about how, the bad taste we're talking about here. Waterloo is fundamentally the last time commemoration takes the form of pure, unadulterated celebration. Right? This is, the next big thing after Waterloo is the Crimea, and the Crimea starts that transition into the democratization of war and the democratization of loss that will eventually lead to World War I and the cenotaphs and the Veterans Day. What is Veterans Day over here? What is Armistice Day, and then Remembrance Day? And as I mentioned, in my book, yes, there are toasts drunk to the memory of the fallen and all of that. There's moments of silence. But even at that most dour, these are so far from laying a wreath of poppies at the cenotaph. These are drunken parties in many cases. My favorite description of all time of the Waterloo Banquet is from the Bristol Mercury, who dismissed it as gold-plated military orgies.
That is quite some quote.
It really is. It really is. So yeah, we do have to sort of remember that it's a different. As much as I hate this phrase, it was a different time, Zach.
It was a different time. Be careful who you try and sound too much like.
That's fair. That's fair. But this is the thing. It was.
I do take the point that you're making here. Yeah. There's a different philosophy around
exactly.
this. You and I are heavily involved in the Napoleonic and Revolutionary War Graves charity. #AGD, #shameless plug, #no, there isn't really an apology coming in this way.
Hashtag, we need a hashtag.
Hashtag, why the hell are we using a hashtag? We need to hashtag get over the hashtag. But so one of the things that people often say to me is, well, aren't you using a 20th century kind of construction to commemorate the war dead here? And there's a whole debate there, but that there is a point that a lot of these guys get chucked into very hasty mass burial pits. This is a different philosophy, and you said it yourself. You've got to go through a sea change to get to the post 1918 consensus on commemoration, and that happens because literally every family has seen somebody very close to them die, and they can't go out there to mourn the dead. Different concept. That's not to say that you didn't have every single family know somebody who had been killed, but it's not quite as immediate. For Britain particularly, the immediacy isn't quite there in the same way, and the narrative that gets spun, right? You've got that kind of inverted commas rule Britannia narrative that I tend to refer to quite a lot these days, particularly in teaching, that it just kind of it embeds itself in how Britain considers itself, right? This is the whole kind of Linda Colley and the construction of British national identity,
national myth and national identity. Yeah, that is the rock on which I have built my church. It's and Waterloo is a crucial part of that construction of that building. And I think it also, it fundamentally, yes, World War I, there's not a family that's untouched. And yes, there are, the Napoleonic Wars cost millions of lives in total, but very little of it falls on British shores. And we don't have illustrated papers. We don't have war correspondence. That's all a mid-19th century Crimea and on thing. So this is by definition more separate. It's pulled further. There's a filter there. And I think also what starts this is sheer relief, because almost most of the people, roughly a quarter of Britain's populace in June of 1815 have known nothing but war. The armies haven't been marching across their land. They haven't, the cities haven't been burned. This is not I'm not saying that that London is as badly off as Moscow or Berlin or anything like that, or that that there's the strife there, but they have known this conflict all their lives, and to have that sort of fall away is, in a weird way, honestly, the one of the best comparisons. And this is also going to sound very strange, and I don't mean to minimize what I'm saying here, but one of the best comparisons might be the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's that moment of, oh, everything has changed. This uncertainty is gone. This conflict is gone. And yeah, I think that hits. It's June 22nd, 1815, when most Londoners hear about the victory. Major Henry Percy shows up on the 21st, very famously delivers the news to the Earl Bathurst, Secretary of State for War, and then continues on to what is now the East India Club in St. James's Square, and lays the two eagles at the feet of the Prince Regent, and is immediately the next day made a lieutenant colonel and an companion of the Order of the Bath as sort of a reward for this. But what marks the minute that that Gazette comes out, there's spontaneous celebrations. There's fireworks. There's new formation dances. There are literally street parties, a la coronations and that sort of thing. And it's that heady combo where the army has just won this major victory that has, in theory, released Britain from a quarter century of war, and conveniently, they're not there to screw it up. Which means that arguably the British Army has never been more popular in the 19th century than they were on the 22nd of June, 1815. It's that combo of they've done something amazing and they're not there to remind everyone they're human.
There is that, for sure. So just to put that, all of what Luke said, in just a tiny bit more context, folks. Imagine this: if you're born in 1792. By June of 1815, you have known 18 months of peace in your entire lifetime. And that's just that little window with the Peace of Amiens until that disintegrates. And to speak further to what you're saying about this kind of different philosophy, that news report in the Gazette, where it lists, it contains a list of dead and wounded, but dead and wounded senior officers, not rank and file. Very different way of looking at things. Just to return to that dangling thread of the appropriate wine to serve with your duck and goose, because what this situation needs right now is some levity and hilarity. So Sam has very kindly responded, affirming that it should be red, definitely red. She says probably an Italian Valpolicella or a Portuguese Douro. Wellington would certainly approve of the latter.
Very much so.
Apparently, other people would advocate for something more hearty, like a Chianti or a French Syrah. Syrah. There we go. Que Syrah, Syrah. That's an appalling pun that will no doubt lose me the two French listeners who do actually listen to this show. And the reason that I'm returning to that is because we are going to move on to the banquet, right? Kind of apt. So there was a purpose to the bridge there.
That is very valid. However, if are we leaving sort of early commemoration by the wayside?
I mean, if you want to keep going, we can keep
going.
So
there is one story that I do. It's one of my favorite stories in my entire book, and I have to share it. And I think those listeners of yours who have not read it will enjoy this. The first truly public commemoration, annual commemoration of the Battle of Waterloo, so June 18th, 1816, is a riot on Hampstead Heath. So the newspapers carry these reports that turn out to be wrong, that there's going to be a grand military display, review, that's the word I'm reaching for, on Hampstead Heath in commemoration of the battle. And so there's a plan already by 1816, we are at the stage where, military reviews are seen as good entertainment by the populace. And so there's this plan for, everyone's going to show up. One of the pleasure boat companies runs a special service, down the Thames to get people there, or up the Thames, whichever delete is appropriate. They all show up. A lot of them the worse for drink. The problem is there's no review planned. Every British veteran of Waterloo at Windsor at that point is sitting down to a slap-up meal on trestle tables along the Long Walk at Windsor, and they're being given roast beef. They're being given lots of stuff. Each one of them is given, I think, a pint of wine by a local wine merchant. There's nothing. There are no military anywhere on Hampstead Heath, and so, being a drunk crowd who didn't get what they want, they riot and they set fire to the Heath. And then they finally get the military display they want, because word finally gets back and a cavalry detachment is sent to get them off the Heath. So yes, the first public annual Waterloo commemoration is a riot in every sense of the word.
That is marvelous. Certainly not the military intervention that they might have hoped for. You can imagine that sort of initially they're all sort of very pleased. Oh, good, finally the army's arrived. And then, of course, sort of the sabres get drawn, and suddenly the whole thing takes a different air. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
From the ridiculous to, depending on your perspective, perhaps the sublime. Certainly the visually ostentatious and spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
The Waterloo Banquet. Now, there's a wing effectively of Apsley House. Apsley House gets built outwards. People, we don't have a time for a detailed architectural history of Apsley House, but Wellington employs a guy who's very good at his job, whose name has just dropped out of my head, which is embarrassing, to expand the place, and along effectively one side of the building is what becomes the Waterloo Banquet Hall. Is the entire wing of Apsley House built specifically with that in mind? I know that room is deliberately fashioned in that way, to the point where you've actually got candelabres coming out of the floor.
Yeah,
that are designed to fit perfectly.
10-ton Russian marble.
And they perfectly fit around the way you would lay out the table for the thing, and then they end up being at the perfect height. It's quite impressive, I must say. They do fit very well into the surroundings. It's quite surprising. And
so how much that room, which is now the picture gallery, and it's graced with all of the with roughly roughly half the art in that room is art that Wellington reclaimed from the French baggage at Victoria, and was gifted to him by the Kingdom of Spain. Was definitely designed to host grand formal occasions. The Waterloo Banquet was absolutely one of those, but it wasn't the only one. He throws balls in that area as well. Yeah. He's got. I think he's a little bit inspired by Versailles, in that sort of the way it's designed. But yeah, no, the candelabras are massive and they are permanent features there, which means you have to be damn careful if you're waltzing.
You do. If you've got two left feet, they are an absolute menace. Not that I've ever danced in that place, because you wouldn't catch me dancing dead, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And that is something that will please a great number of people. Provide them with much relief. But
so the banquet takes place in 3 venues over the course of its life. For the first 7 years, from 1821, which is the first one, to 1828, it's in the State Dining Room, which is in the northeast corner of Apsley House. You can go in there. It's part of the tour, and they usually use it. It's always set up with one of his dining sets. It's usually the one that's used to show off the silver set with all the pyramids, sort of the Egyptian style. But that's where it is for the first couple of years, and that one can seat between 50 and 60 guests. 1829, partially because of the construction of the picture gallery and partially for convenience, The Waterloo Banquet takes place at 10 Downing Street because Wellington is the prime minister. And then from 30 to 52, when it stops, it is in the picture gallery, which can seat around 85 comfortably. The highest number of guest lists that we have is 1852, and there are 79 guests listed. So we're getting pretty close.
Why the bigger guest list in 52? Surely you would expect the opposite to be the case, and then it would turn into a smaller affair as more people died.
So it actually becomes bigger and bigger. It's fascinating. As it becomes more of a public thing, and there are definitely people that are mainstays until they pass away. But they fill it up even more. So you get this breakdown. Hang on, I just to make it clear, I do not have these numbers at my beck and call at all times. So it really starts to go big in around 1840. Now, to be clear, we don't have guest lists for every year. We've got a few archival ones from the 20s and 30s, and then the newspapers start carrying guest lists, and that's where the rest of this is from. So from 45 on, it's always over 70. It's hovering anywhere between. And there are a couple of others. The first one in 21 had between 30 and 40 guests. We're not sure because the newspapers say one thing and the guest list, which may be a fragment, says another. Okay, but I think genuinely they're trying to fill it up a little bit. They're trying to make it as big as possible. And I think there are people that are invited later that never would have gotten tickets earlier. But people start to make room.
And the principle is you've got to be a veteran, right?
You have to have served at Waterloo as an officer. Mm-hmm. Now, in theory, that means we have an opportunistic guest list, a potential guest list of 1,770 men. The total that I've put together in terms of people who are invited are 207 names, which is just under 12% of the surviving officers.
Okay. So what's the lowest ranked individual that manages to get in? That is completely putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
there.
that
I'm
is
curious about, how low does this really go? Because you're going to have your mainstays who are going to be there. Hill is obviously going to have an open-ended invitation. Ditto Uxbridge, but
the two who make the most, Uxbridge or Anglesey is at 15. Hill is at 6, and then he passes away. Obviously, he went to more, but he just didn't go to the ones that we have guest lists for. But of the guest lists we have, the two leading attendees are Fitzroy Somerset, which is no surprise, Wellington's military attaché. Later, of course, Baron Raglan, and Edward Bowater. Both of those have 16 appearances. In terms of lowest rank, the lowest rank I can pick out, can tell you definitively, is colonel. There are colonels, and there are probably people there that were captains at Waterloo, but by the time these things become big, they will have served in India or somewhere else, and they're at least a colonel, if not a knight of the British Empire and that sort of thing.
Sure.
Actually, they wouldn't have been a knight of British Empire. They would have been a knight of the Bath, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I wasn't going to split hairs. But yeah, I get what you're on about. Is there any juicy goss from these? You've got a bunch of big egos in that room, not least the Duke himself. But you've also got some people who are known for their teetotal tendencies. Hill is not somebody who drinks heavily. But do we have a moment where Hill forgets himself, has a couple of glasses of port, and I don't know, suddenly busts out with some forthright views on whoever it might be?
Oh man, I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you that we have definitive proof of that. We do not, unfortunately. In terms of forthright views, the closest thing I can say is, there's a very the big thing at these banquets, besides being there and being seen, there are two places where you can jockey for position. One is outside of the banquet, and it's arriving to see who gets the most cheers. It's June. A lot of people are in open-topped carriages, and there is a space. It is the I'm just picturing London geography here. It is the western side of the eastern entrance to Apsley House's gates. So not the door itself, but the gates in front. And the way traffic worked, if you stood right there, that was where almost everyone who came in caught your eye. And therefore, if you were in uniform and saluted, they were obliged to salute back. So there's definitely some jockeying. And we have accounts like, the Earl of Cardigan, for example, shows up outside at least once to sort of burnish his own reputation and get people to acknowledge him. So there's that part. There's, sort of the cheers of the crowd as you arrive and jockeying for position in there. The other one is the toasts, because the second half of this banquet is effectively toasts and giving thanks and speeches and things like that. Now, there's a very strict hierarchy, right? You always toast the cavalry first. You always toast the guards before the line infantry. Anyone who's ever been involved in the British Army is looking at their podcast device of choice going, you shock me yet again, right? But there were people. And yet generally, those toasts, sort of they call out the line infantry. And they'll highlight someone. So we have an account, for example, of Wellington saying at one point, calling for the next toast to be the line and highlighting Sir Colin Halkett, who he says, as I recall, did sterling service for that arm at that moment. The Prussians are toasted, but they're almost always toasted to Sir Henry Harding, because he was the attaché, he was the British representative in the Prussian army. So there's that sort of thing. And you see, so like if someone shows up, for example, places like maybe the medical corps won't get a shout out unless someone from the medical corps is at the banquet. In that case, then they get the shout out. And there always are a few that are sort of given individuals, especially in later years. So, Sir Harry Smith gets a shout out after he comes back from Africa, that sort of thing. And I think that's very much sort of the jockeying into position that you get. There is one case that I encountered of a engineering firm who designed a steam war chariot, basically what we would describe as sort of half armored car, half tank, who were desperate to get it to the attention of the War Office, the Ordnance, and so sent the blueprint to Apsley House, asking Wellington to lay it on the table after the plates had been cleared. And he got a very polite, take a long walk off a short pier, apply directly to the Minister of Ordnance, Secretary of Ordnance, and who, by the way, was invited that night. But that's not neither here nor there.
See, I thought you were going to say that, the best solution to this and what they were aiming for was to get one of the guests to turn up in said war chariot, because that would have made quite the impression and caused quite the stir. You can just imagine what all of these Londoners would have made of this great sort of hulk of iron puffing and blowing its way across.
Quite literally chuffing heck.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so we've talked about who was there. We've talked about the juicy goss that sadly there wasn't. I was hoping there would be knives sort of stuck in people's backs, and well, not like literally, because they had quite enough of that. But sort of, you got people and wine. Things happen, but sadly not. Because they were far too refined. So what was served?
Okay, so we only have one remaining menu from it was from the 1839 banquet. It's courtesy of the archives at Stratfield Say, unsurprisingly. It is insane. It's utterly insane. It starts with your choice of soup, spring soup or turtle soup. Then we've got 4 fish dishes, accompanying
Easy for you to say.
Indeed. 4 removes, which were dishes that were sort of brought in, served, and then brought back out.
Sorry, foodie Philistine here, as many will attest to. Uh, why? What? I don't understand.
Okay. So removes are additional dishes served within a course. They're added after the originals are removed. So basically, the fish course is served. There's the 4 options there. We've got turbot with lobster sauce, Dover sole filet au velo, trout in Genoese sauce, and a matelote of eels. And then once everyone is served, the fish dishes are removed and 4 meat dishes are added in the same course. So fat chicken à la Régence, ham with Madeira, beef filet à la Jardinière, and veal calf's head en tarte.
I mean, yuck to that, yuck to the eels. But I'm surprised because I would have thought etiquette would mean that you can't serve meat alongside fish.
So I think the general thing was just that was done, and then there's even more, right? We've got 24 entrees.
20.
Yep, to choose from. To be clear, like the options are there.
Okay.
We're a long way from chicken or fish, sir. We're there. Then 4 roasts. 4 and then 8 more removes, then 24 entremets, and then 2 side table services. So my favorite part about this is one of the side table services is entirely dessert, right? 2 apple tarts, gooseberry tart, currant tart, cabinet pudding, whatever that is, rice pudding, and fried whiting. Although whether fried whiting is a dessert or not is entirely up to you. But the other one
there are so many jokes that could be made in there.
Right?
People, please, you will keep this clean. This is not a dirty show. This is a clean show, please.
Indeed it is. But the other one is like vol au vent with bechamel sauce, croquette of fowl au velo, 2 full haunches of venison, roast beef, a saddle of roasted mutton, because Wellington had to have his mutton in there, and rice with consommé. Now, one thing I will say, and you may have already twigged this based on what I've been saying, this is one of my favorite ridiculous things. The menu for the 1839 Waterloo Banquet was in French.
I can't even begin to express the irony.
Yeah. And I would like to give a shout out to Lydia Rousseau, who at that point was not at that point in 1839, but recently was a house steward at Apsley House who translated the menu. Yeah. So there's a lot on there. The menu itself can be found in my book. It's printed in its entirety, and it's absurd.
Can we just emphasize, people, that it's not the entirety of the book? Who Owned Waterloo is not just everything that was served at the Waterloo Banquet, but it's, as you can hear, it's quite lengthy.
It is the best part of a page in chapter 3. Yeah,
the immediate question has to be: does Wellington pay every single penny of this out of his own pocket?
I believe he does.
Every single year. How does it not bankrupt him? That gives you an indication of how much this guy is bringing in. And how much he's got,
let's
right?
talk. Lord Commander of the Cinque Ports, Chancellor of Oxford University. There's a bunch that he's, plus all of the value of Stratfield Say and the other investments, and his share of prize money over the years. I don't think he ever had to really worry about cash.
No, I mean, it doesn't sound as though he's sort of struggling to work out where the money for the weekly bread ration is coming from, does it? Okay, so at the risk of stating the blindingly obvious, we've covered what is unquestionably a highly elitist gathering there.
Unquestionably, this was an all-male formal dinner. There were never any women invited. Even Victoria, when she was the reigning monarch, didn't get an invitation. Prince Albert represented her. So, strictly all male. And you had to be a veteran unless you were the reigning monarch or Prince Albert, and very, very occasionally a ranking ambassador of an allied nation would be invited. But this is the very definition of elite.
I mean, my gob hit the floor when you said Albert has to go in Victoria's stead.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. You kind of wonder. I mean, it depends where Victoria was in her stage of life, but for somebody who was so fond of the Duke and vice versa.
So there is one year where Victoria throws a party. I don't remember if it's a ball or a fete or an entertainment the same night, and invites not only Wellington, but everyone who's attending his banquet to toddle over to Buckingham Palace afterwards. And a number of them do attend. This is the thing we forget about. And really, honestly, unless you are knee deep in sort of cultural or social history of the time, or honestly read a lot of Regency romance novels, because they get this dead on right as well. The ton partied until 4, 5, 6 in the morning. So this party ends around 11. I would estimate roughly half of these people every year head off to something else afterwards.
It's literally the definition of the night is young.
Yeah, very much so. So I mean, I know, so there's we don't have definite proof, but I am pretty sure that a couple of people headed off to Buckingham Palace afterwards to maybe, who knows, maybe try to pick up one of the Queen's ladies in waiting. It's the night is young, as you say.
Indeed. So if you don't get an invite, simply that we've digressed somewhat.
Yeah, I know. I was about to apologize for leading you off of what was your question to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do if you don't get an invite? Because I mean, let's start with the army, right? Because in theory, if you're an officer, you stand a chance of getting an invitation. In reality, good luck, right? You've given us the numbers, 12%.
We do have letters addressed to Wellington's secretary, basically begging for invitations. Colonel would like to inform that he will be in London on June 18th with his uniform freshly pressed.
Please let me come to the party.
Yeah,
pretty please.
Exactly.
So if you don't get an invite, I'd imagine pretty much every regiment that has been at Waterloo must be throwing their own parties. So how does that look in a kind of a physical sense? And where do the civilians kind of get in on the act, if at all?
So there's a couple of questions in there, actually. So we'll start. We'll sort of go through. Early on, the military parties are reported in the press. There are things like the grand picnic in Windsor. After the grand picnic, the brigade of the Foot Guards throw a party for the Royal Horse Guards Blue. And the next year, the Royal Horse Guards Blue throw a party for the Foot Guards.
Nice.
There's a lot of that. But what starts to happen really as the banquet takes off, and it's coincidental, is military parties start to become more and more private. They start to be in barracks. They start to be things like that. And the fundamental two-part answer to why that is partially it is, yes, it's the banquet, right? That's now the centerpiece. But it's also because, as you said earlier, people drink and make poor decisions. And we have evidence of, a group of soldiers breaking every single window in a pub. There's a riot at the Marquis of Granby public house that leaves several people injured and one person actually dead of a cracked skull. And that's 1821 as well. And there's ridicule. One of your favorites and mine, William Heath, the well-known caricaturist, does a wonderful piece of art called The Glorious 18th of June, And it is two drunk cavalrymen staggering along, jackets undone, shakos flying. One sword is upside down and falling out of its scabbard. But their Waterloo medals are very palpably on display, and it's very clear what he's criticizing. So I think it's partially a PR thing. It's let's contain this. If we're gonna go nuts, let's go nuts in private, where we can't be criticized.
But also, is there an argument? And I'm kind of I've got one sort of half of my brain on Vittoria Princi's recent work on. Granted, she's looked at this more in a kind of a French context, but on barracks and sort of the way in which where the military is day to day basically changes during this period. That move away from quartering the rank and file amongst the civilian population, taking them out of that population and putting them in their own purpose-built space, i.e. the barrack setting, which has a whole kind of host of rationales and benefits, and arguably also disadvantages that we would have to do another podcast on. But is there an element of that playing into this as well?
Yeah, there absolutely is. It's easier. They've got the space all set. It is private. They can do what they want. At the risk of sounding very scholarly, the early to mid 19th century is when military space changes. Military spaces change, and that plays a huge part in this. What is fascinating is especially in the colonies, places like Australia, you see Waterloo as an occasion where elite civilians are invited into the military space for balls and parties and things like that. But there is fundamentally a separation that's occurring. Are there exceptions? Absolutely, right? The entire officer regiment, officer corps of one cavalry regiment shows up at Bath Sydney Gardens one year for a big party, and their regimental bands make brisk business playing different venues on these dates. But basically what starts to happen is we begin to see that divide, the military-civilian divide, kick in as that military space comes to a fore. So that's sort of part one of this. If you can't get an invitation to the banquet, or there's no chance of you ever getting an invitation to the banquet, you're a civilian, things like that, you can show up outside and watch people enter. And they do, like, we have reports of, enough crowds showing up to block Piccadilly, to watch all the people. It's kind of like a red carpet, right? In a certain way. As this becomes more and more popular, and as the sort of reputation of this banquet becomes lusher and lusher, more and more people want to see it. And, yes, the Illustrated London News is starting and things like that. But they begin to get, Fitzroy Somerset and Wellington's civilian secretary, whose name escapes me, begin to get requests to see the table laid, see the table set. And they start, it's on and off, but people show up to see that table all set up before anything happens, before the officers are let in. A little bit like, sort of, well, I mean, in a certain way, the way you still go to Apsley House, you see that thing. And actually, if you went there around the Waterloo Bicentennial, 2015, they had the full banquet set laid out so you could see it. So a little bit like that, sort of, spectator stuff like that. Now,
there is a slight air, sorry to interrupt, there is a slight air in all of this of that wanting to, I almost have a vision that some people would have paid to go and see these people having the Waterloo banquet in the same way that people, and Napoleon taps into this at one point, doesn't he? He allows people to watch him eating in that way that the kings do.
It's not just Napoleon. This was a medieval thing that was a very regular thing. And even at this point, right, we're talking 1820s, not so much food, but you could pay to watch condemned prisoners have their last church service, like their last prayers. uh it's that sort of thing.
It's a
there's
different concept for a
absolutely
date. I'll be honest with you.
it's a flex, right? It's a certain flex.
It is. I mean, each to their own.
Yeah. Forgive me, I've just come across the numbers. The candelabras carved from solid blocks of marble were 1.25 tons each. They weren't 10 tons each. They were 1.25, but they were 12 feet high.
Okay. We'll forgive you the earlier lapse.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it is absolutely. And I think that, there are requests that come in for sort of like, can we see them eating? And those are always turned down, but there becomes this sort of, let's see the place. Now, if you have no interest in this, or you don't particularly fancy fighting the crowds, or you don't have an inn to get an invitation to at least see this, you're still spoiled for choice, right? There are parties. Almax generally throws a fete. A lot of the theaters will throw something. But the big one in London that is not the Waterloo Banquet, the one that becomes big, is Vauxhall Gardens Waterloo Fete. And that becomes sort of the center of the straight up civilian ton and world in London.
I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Talk us through what that involves by comparison.
So that also shifts over the course of the last one of those is 1850, either 1850 or 1851. I forget which one. And at the beginning, it's a standard Vauxhall night. You've got the fireworks, you've got the illuminations. They throw up some more lanterns. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but whenever there's a special occasion at Vauxhall, the way they tout it is they talk about the number of the extra thousands of lights they've added. So they'll add 5,000, 10,000, 12,000 to their legendary illuminations, always keeping certain walkways dark for assignations and things like that. And the illuminations will be themed, right? There'll be transparencies of crossed pieces, muskets, and the Wellington's bust or a profile, or sort of the Waterloo medal done 20 feet wide, that sort of thing. And their regular concerts will be supplemented by a military band, or they'll play like military waltzes, things like that. As this goes on, they start evolving. And they there's a massive rejig of Vauxhall in 1827, where they completely redo the gardens. And at the back, they create this massive ground called, until Vauxhall closes in 1859, the Waterloo Ground, where they stage a giant reenactment. Like, they run gas pipes underneath so that they can actually blow up Huguemont and things like that. And there is all sorts of insanity. There are huge numbers of noise complaints from the people around Vauxhall.
You shock me.
Yeah, I know, right? Sort of this purpose-built dance floor of Aries.
But also, I'm not being funny. It's one night a year. It's not like modern day bonfire night here in the UK, which sort of seems to start in the middle of October and then sort of continues all the way through to sort of New Year's Day. This is one night.
Yes and no.
Oh,
Because
okay.
if you put that much money into a performance, you're going to want to do it more than once.
That is fair.
So yes, the big one is June 18th. But they keep going. There's all sorts of, by popular demand, this will return tonight and that sort of thing. It happened on the 18th, then on the 20th when it still drew an immense crowd. And it was going still in July, but we know that because Wellington attended on the night of the 12th of July, and I quote, laughed heartily at his representative. Yeah. So 27 seems to have been like the apogee, right? I think it nearly bankrupts them. So they scale back, but there is always, sort of more, and they add Waterloo to the Cosmorama and things like that. So it becomes this sort of this big event. And it's definitely sort of, I think it's a day when, so you could buy a season ticket to Vauxhall and it came in the form of basically a fob or a charm that you could just flash at the door. And I think it's really a day where more season ticket holders will cash in that fob, as well as other people showing up. It's always well attended. It's always a good night.
Sure. Okay, so let's start taking this outside of London, though. Sort of an hour and a bit into the recording, because this is a country-wide affair.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I guess there are two ways to look at this. One is to look at what other towns/cities are doing. Particularly interested in sort of the inverted commas 4 nations perspective, what happens in, for example, Dublin, but also Edinburgh and Cardiff, but also what's happening in the countryside, because the veterans spread, right?
They do.
To go back to our shameless plug about the War Graves charity, this is the challenge that we've got, that they're in pretty much most churchyards that were around at the time up and down the country. So you've got representatives of this battle literally all over the place.
Yeah.
How does that kind of feed into what people are and are not doing on the 18th in subsequent years?
Yeah. So it all across the country, it starts the same as it does in London, right? It starts with military banquets. It starts with people buying, funding military banquets. There are occasions where, especially like 1816, 1817, a regiment comes back, and whatever town they're in throws them a dinner, things like that. So we've got reports of this in Bury St. Edmunds. We've got reports of this in Ipswich, Liverpool, Derby, Inverness. Edinburgh follows London's route. There's not just the military stuff, but there's also, banquets for the elite. Usually with a ball afterwards that is a subscription ball, so it's not just quite the elite. A little bit more widespread. And things continue to evolve. You asked about sort of the 4 nations, and this is actually a really fascinating side of it. Scotland seizes on this. Scotland is very quick to get in on Waterloo commemoration, right? They're one of the first to put up a panorama. They're among the first to sort of celebrate it. I mean, for legitimate reasons, right? They've got the Scots Greys taking the eagle. They've got all of that. They've got some stuff to pull on. And what
Equally,
it's
really... I'm just sorry to interrupt you yet again. Very bad form. I'm just a tad surprised because yes, Scots Greys, fair enough, and yet, the Union Brigade is there, and it contains an Irish contingent as well. The Highlanders have been a mainstay of Wellington's army all the way across Portugal, Spain, and southern France.
So the Highlanders are so popular that they're put into almost everything, to the point where Colonel Leach, who I believe I've talked about on your podcast before, complains in one of his memoirs that if you look at the average representation of Waterloo, you would assume that the Scots on their own beat Boney. without the help of the English or the Irish. He doesn't even mention the Welsh.
Sorry, Wales.
Yeah. I'm reminded of that speech that Martin Sheen once gave about Welsh independence that started with a quote from, I think, an early Encyclopedia Britannica, where the entire entry for Wales was Wales, see England. Yeah. And I mean, his whole point was that we need to stop this, right? It's terrible. And, yes, the Welsh have a lot to be proud of, especially their sports teams. But yeah, so there's Scotland is very, very good at this. And I think it really is about it's two streams. On one side, we have the fact that Waterloo commemoration becomes conservative. It becomes political. Because Waterloo itself, as I've said many times before, is a conservative victory, right? The Napoleonic Wars are a triumph of traditional conservatism over radicalism. I won't make the mistake of quoting the Ancien Regime, because I don't want Beatrice de Graaf to reach through her podcast device of choice and strangle me. But it's definitely conservative. And they've got Wellington, who is this avatar of conservatism. And so Scottish conservative clubs latch on to that and start doing Waterloo events to sort of push Scottish conservatism.
Is this a marriage of convenience as well, though? Because in terms of kind of nation building, inverted commas, and trying to sort of really emphasize the value of the union, it suits the government to play this card, and they do it well before Waterloo. They're doing it for Salamanca. They're doing it.
Oh yeah.
It's an ongoing thing.
Oh yeah, it works both ways.
Yeah, but I'm also thinking about how this, and apologies, I know this isn't something that you specifically do, but there's this is the era of the development of martial race theory, which for folks who aren't familiar is basically kind of a construction, an abomination in many respects. That it basically, this is a very basic view, but it basically goes, look, the Irish are good, hearty lads who love a fight. And so, if you're from an area that sort of looks a bit like Ireland, then perhaps you're sort of the type who is spoiling for a fight, but you need strong discipline to keep you in check. Please note that is the opinion of the time. That is not the opinion of this podcast host. And when it comes to mountainous areas, i.e. the Highlands, then you've got sort of this really kind of ultra hardy, very martial type you can craft into the epitome of the soldier, and they go and take this idea out to India and start thinking about the Himalayan regions and start trying to apply it out there.
The Gurkhas are a perfect example
precisely.
of this. Although, in fairness, the Gurkhas kicked the British's ass in order to earn their place, quote unquote.
Quite right.
Look, there are places where examining that geography makes a deal of sense. Right? Whoever looked at the outer Hebrides and basically said, this is where we need to recruit people from to settle the Falklands. That makes a deal of sense, right? It's the same conditions, it's the same weather, like they know what to do. But there are also deeply problematic sides to this, hugely done. And yeah, no, there is absolutely that part. But I think that goes both ways. It is absolutely the Union trying to highlight itself. But at the same time, it's also the Scottish reminding Parliament of how crucial they are, right? This goes both ways.
Kind of, you couldn't have done it without us mentality.
Exactly.
Therefore, make sure that you're investing appropriately and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And that happens to an even larger extent in Dublin. Dublin is the center of Anglo-Irish power, right? It's the middle of the Pale, all of that. And so there is absolutely, some of that in there, but they get even more, because there it is, look at all of these Anglo-Irish men who fought, including Wellington. Can we please have Catholic emancipation now? And pushing for that. And of course, Wellington does help hammer that through. And so there is that, but at the same time as well, in a way that probably Scotland doesn't have at least as much, but Ireland absolutely does. Military displays in Phoenix Park are a very handy way of demonstrating military occupation through pomp. right? That's up there with, martial parades in India. That's, look at our power, look at our guns, don't mess with us. So there is that side of things.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions when it came to Ireland. How much of what we see is about sending that message as the occupiers of a rather reluctant populace.
The iron.
Sorry, you carry on.
The iron fist of occupation clothed in the velvet glove of spectacle.
Did you come up with that yourself, or
Yes, that is a direct quote from one of my articles that I actually quote in this chapter.
Very nicely done. That is eloquent. I don't know why I said that with a tone of surprise. My apologies. I should have said that with a sort of matter of fact. That is characteristically eloquent. There we go. I've saved it. There we go.
There we go.
We can make this all go away in the edit. He says, as if he actually does a thorough edit of these shows these days. Okay, so we've talked about the United Kingdom / disunited kingdom, depending on your perspective on contemporary sort of politics and politics of the time. Let's talk about one of the things that's really pretty key within your book, that civil military divide. We touched on this already, but the nationalization of Waterloo and the way in which that's reflected in annual commemoration.
So this is actually a really good segue, because it also allows me to talk about the other part that we haven't mentioned, which is the urban-rural divide, right, that you mentioned, and then we got completely divided with martial race theory.
I'm amazed that we rabbit holed on this podcast.
I'm shocked to discover there is gambling going on in this establishment. Annual commemoration takes the same form of nationalization as other areas, right? As spectacle does, especially as material commemoration does. And it is extensive. One of the earlier examples of sort of that commemoration is towns trying to outdo each other, right? So if the one town rings its bells and its rival town has to ring its bells and put up bunting, and then there's a parade and back and forth. And this is very clearly not about Waterloo, and it's not about veterans. It's about the individual towns, right? There's some of that. But slowly what starts to happen, and this is actually one of the first places I came across the sort of nationalization that would then become the sort of throughput of my book, is Waterloo becomes fundamentally a modern Saints' Day. It becomes, and this is something we're totally familiar with, right? Labor Day and Memorial Day in the United States are holidays where people go, they barbecue, and there are parties, and they go to their sales on like cars and mattresses and appliances. They are, in theory, to commemorate, celebrate organized labor and military sacrifice. But that has, yes, there are still parades, there are still things, but some of that has gone out the window. And we see that here too. There are regular things that happen. Actually only about 20 miles south of Wellington, the town, there is a long-standing Waterloo livestock market that always happens on the 18th of June that has nothing to do with the battle whatsoever. It's used as a day to open aqueducts, to open railways. There's sort of that. It becomes the sort of, well, when do we do it? We do this on this day because everyone has off this day. It's a feast day. It's that kind of thing. So that sort of drives it as well. There are other exceptions to this, obviously. There are a couple, there's two rural events that I want to talk about because they're two of my favorites. The first one is, starts in 1819, runs through the 1820s. It's the Winterslow Hut Amusements / Sports Day. And this is very palpably, it's there for the excuse of Waterloo, but at the same time, you walk through this and it's going to look the same as any other village fair, any other summer day in the UK, right? It's got wrestling, it's got donkey racing, it's got, and I quote, the singing for snuff by old women, and single stick matches, which is a form of dueling involving cudgels, for a good old cheese. A wheel of cheese was the prize. Flawless, 10 out of 10, no notes. On the other side, we have the Arlesford's Dance on the Knive, which is also known as the Waterloo Maying, which is effectively an outdoor version of the big Waterloo balls, the big Waterloo fetes. Under the patronage of the local nobility, the Baron and Lady Rodney, a handsome and spacious bower is erected with a full band, and you get to it via the lake where there's small boats drawing you across. It's almost Venetian. And then under the stars and under the lights, the ton couples dance all night in the middle of Arlesford. So it does go both ways, but there's absolutely sort of rural sides to this. But at the same time, by the end, you've got things like a cattle market that has no relation to Waterloo whatsoever. And as far as I can tell, doesn't even have like a banner up saying like Waterloo Day Cattle Market. It's just the 18th of June every year.
See, when you mentioned the cattle market, I was desperately hoping that you were going to sort of say that they ran a 20% discount. I don't know, maybe specifically for veterans. Bring your Waterloo medal for 10% off the hammer price.
So the interesting thing about this is most of these, the reports at least, have no mention whatsoever of any military at them. The Dance on the Knife has precisely one veteran that is mentioned, and that is only because he's apparently very good at giving blindfolded wheelbarrow rides. Yeah.
I mean, that's a unique skill.
It is.
I thought you were really going to sort of say something less decorous, shall we say, in terms of what this veteran was very good at giving out blindfolded. But
no.
This is a clean show.
This is an absolutely clean show. But yeah, so a lot of these have, sort of no military, and were there veterans at these things? Absolutely. That cattle market was basically the majority of the county. There's going to pull in veterans that have turned to farming, that were returning to family farms, all of that. And were there veterans at these in the beer hall or the local pub drinking with their old friends? Of course there were, right? But the crucial thing is that the military has been removed as a motivation. And even in places where there's massive military like decorations, right? There's a ball that happens at one of London's theaters that is like a grand military masquerade, and the Times reports the next day that there's not a single officer at the thing. It's just a bunch of civilians dressed in reenactment. No offense to our reenacting friends who are much more living historians than these people were. These are people who just rent a costume to get drunk and possibly get laid. So, yeah. I
mean, some things never change, but we shall move very swiftly on.
Plus ça change, plus ça même chose.
Indeed. I was actually going to stay with that. To what extent does this get exploited by individuals sort of seeking the affirmation of all of this? Do you want to just say, we perhaps have touched a little bit on this, particularly in reference to what we did on Waterloo Across the Empire, right? When we were talking about the guy out in Australia who seems to have sort of served in about 5 regiments and would have been about 3 at the time. I forget the precise details, apologies, but it was great.
No, yeah. There is a bunch of that. There is absolutely a bunch of that. So what we see a lot of in this case is things that are there already, theaters, concerts, etc., that add a touch. So there's the Prague Minstrels are in London at one point on June 18th, and they add a Waterloo cantata or something to their program, and they announce in the papers that they're adding this to their regular program. Astley's Royal Amphitheatre, it's not a yearly thing, but every couple of years we'll run a revival of the Battle of Waterloo Hippodrama around June 18th to sort of bring all this together.
And we are going to just pause proceedings to make a shameless plug on Luke's behalf that his second book, which he's currently working on, will be on precisely that.
Yes, indeed.
Details in due course, but
it'll be a source book.
To that.
It will be a source book that I'm very excited about. I'm having an absolute blast writing it. The shout out actually to the British Library's Playbills collection for letting me leaf through stuff.
Yeah, it's been quite amusing to get periodic WhatsApp messages from you about, you know, am I seeing this right? Are they aping Nelson? Is this, England expects, but
Yes.
the Wellington version? And
Yes.
we're both going, yep, that's exactly what's happening there.
Yeah.
Imagination not always a strong point for some of these guys creating this stuff.
Let me actually read that out loud. I've got it right here. Gentlemen, the world has fixed its eye upon us. England expects much. No one is here, I trust, who would not rather die than disappoint his native country's hope. I mean, Nelson said it more eloquently, but he in fairness had to. He had a character limit on those flags.
This is true.
But yeah, no, there's absolutely there's that. While we're on a very slight digression, I've talked about cattle markets, livestock markets, guild days, openings of canals and steamship lines. My favorite random thing to happen on June 18th that has nothing to do with Waterloo whatsoever is one town decided it was the perfect day to run their sacred music festival. So liturgical church singing is exactly the correct way to commemorate one of the bloodiest battles of the 19th century.
Of course it is. Why didn't it occur to me sooner?
Yeah. But anyway, to get back to the previous point, so you do have that, sort of. So for example, 1817, the anniversary of Waterloo in 1817 is the opening of Waterloo Bridge. They seize on that as the day. There's a big spectacle. They get veterans there. They get cannon captured there. The Prince Regent decides he's going to tour it on a boat and then on foot, and he hands out a bunch of medals, a lot of merchandise and tat. And if you're interested in that, there's a short video I did on that medal from the Waterloo Live that you can find on the NRWGC YouTube channel, along with a whole bunch of other utterly fascinating things from that 12-hour marathon that we did. But there's a theater, a couple I think it's about half a mile south of Waterloo Bridge. It's roughly right these days where it's in the area of like the Imperial War Museum, that area. And they put on a big commemorative event that commemorates not only the battle, but the opening of the bridge. And so they build a huge set. They have a part of a set that's like the grand battle, and there's the traditional tournament or display, and then they also have a set that's like two arches of the bridge, so they can commemorate that. Georgian spectacle, and London in particular, was full of people who were going to do whatever they could to make money and make their mark. They were showmen to the end.
The Georgians extravagant, shocked I am.
Never.
Okay, let's change tack a little bit. Napoleon. This is an unfair one of me because you focused on consumerism and memory.
Yeah, but I have heard of him.
Funny that. Do we know what Napoleon does on Waterloo Day? And the reason that I ask this is not kind of a throwaway question, but of course by this point Napoleon is on St. Helena. Okay, so this is really kind of taking off in sort of the 1820s, and he's dead before the 1821 anniversary comes around. But he's being held effectively at His Majesty's pleasure, right? So what's Napoleon's experience of Waterloo Day? Because he goes through this period of his incarceration where he is basically having his nose really rubbed in it by the governor of the island, who is his de facto jailer. So I can't imagine actually that the British are tactful. It's not often a trait that you can apply to the British when it comes to how they deal with the French. So what's Napoleon's experience of Waterloo Day, if we know anything about it?
So I haven't done the research on this. This is something that's going to go into my Empire book, because St. Helena is part of the Empire. It's an East India Company island at that point. But it is something I am going to look into, because it is delightfully petty, in the same as recreating the Battle of Waterloo on the Fields of Abraham next to Quebec. It would not surprise me in the slightest if the British are commemorating this. What I think is more likely to happen is they're throwing a military-style banquet party for the garrison in St. Helena, and just to be polite, they send Napoleon an invitation. Polite.
That's one way of phrasing it.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me to discover they did the exact same thing for Trafalgar.
Yes, nor me. I would not be surprised by that either. Okey-doke. So the next question has to be, how does all of this die? Is it quite as simple as, well, Wellington goes, and obviously from that point on there isn't another Waterloo banquet, but we talk a lot about, what does it take for Waterloo to fade from popular memory?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, the Crimean War comes around, but it's not exactly something you would celebrate as a great success for British arms, much though people have sort of views on Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade. My views on it apparently aren't shared by the majority, but I think
look, if you're going to honor anything, there, honor the Thin Red Line and the Charge of the Heavy Brigade, which is much more successful.
Indeed. But how does this fade away? Because obviously today, 18th of June, it's not even, I would say, remembered in the same way that Trafalgar Day is, and Trafalgar Day doesn't really have a mass cultural following, but people are perhaps a tad more inclined to remember Trafalgar Day than they are Waterloo Day. So how do we get to this point where it just fizzles out?
So part of it is the death of Wellington. Part of it is the death of more and more veterans. All of that. But there is still an interest, right? There's a Waterloo panorama in 1889, 1890 for the 75th anniversary that does relatively well. I mean, it lasts about a year. It's nothing compared to the runs that the panoramas had in the 1820s and 30s, but it does relatively well. There's a massive gold-plated military orgy at Chelsea Hospital that year as well to celebrate. So there's 100% there. I think. I think so I think the annual stuff starts to fade with the death of Wellington, with the death of veterans, and crucially with the Crimean War, which does push that, but also does push that question of, are we really celebrating this? Like, it is that begins to be that question of taste, especially key in addition because of the people that we celebrated against. We're now dying side by side with in the Crimea.
Yeah, but some of the generals haven't caught up with that.
That is very true. Raglan actually tries to time an attack on the anniversary to sort of commemorate it, and the French are just like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Funnily enough, what Astley's basically shuts down production of the Battle of Waterloo during the Crimean War and becomes the center of Anglo-French cooperation instead. They put all of these hippodramas on about like the glory of French arms and like the meeting of French and English kings in honor. It's a propaganda machine. It's kind of brilliant to watch. And then the war ends and they start again, occasionally putting Waterloo on again. But yeah, it becomes less and less, I think, as people age out of it, as people die out of it, and it becomes more what we experience, which is, yes, if you go to Waterloo, the field of Waterloo on the 18th of June any year, there will be reenactors there. But on the 200th, the 150th, the 225th, the 250th, there's always going to be more. The humanity loves those moments. And so it becomes more of that. So that's why the 75th is big. The 100th would have been enormous, except for this pesky World War I thing that somehow takes over.
It's the wrong war. That's all that I can possibly say. It's the wrong war. Look, they even stole the name for our war. Ours was known as the Great War, and then they decided to call that one the Great War. It's the incorrect war. I'm very sorry. Yeah. I know it has a following, but it's just incorrect, people.
It's also just really depressing to read about.
It is.
Yeah. No, I mean, so the other thing there is, once you get to the First World War, right? We have Waterloo is commemorating a victory over our now staunchest ally, with the help of our now sworn enemy.
Yeah.
You can get away with the Belgians and the Netherlands, especially since Britain goes to war in 1914 for the Treaty of London and for Belgian neutrality. But yeah, the Prussian sides, we don't talk about that anymore.
It's not fashionable, is it?
The House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha becomes the House of Windsor to get away from that. St. Petersburg becomes Petrograd to get away from that. They're not exactly going to celebrate Anglo-Prussian cooperation.
No, absolutely. Okay.
So I think it really does sort of it begins to fade, and then especially as this shifts, as commemoration shifts to what we recognize today, it becomes more and more of a different thing.
What was it Macmillan said? Events, dear boy, events. There's your answer. So one final question before I let you go back to your life, I guess, rather than sitting here at my beck and call, talking into a podcasting mic. The date, and I mean today's date, you chose November 18th for a very specific reason. And I'm guessing it's not as lazy as, hey, it's the 18th of a month and it's sort of the month before Christmas, so that'll do. So why today? Why is today significant in this story?
Look, I would be lying if I didn't say the choice of November is at least partly to get it onto Christmas lists, to get it available for people to buy their fathers. It makes a great Christmas present for your father, guys, or for you, or for anyone else.
You just saved me the plug that I was going to do at the end, so thanks for that.
No worries. The hardback was released on June 18th, which is obvious why. Like, come on, I had to. There was no question. But the paperback wasn't going to be ready for June 18th of this year, and waiting for another year seemed a bit silly. November the 18th, 1852, was the Duke of Wellington's funeral. It was the day that sort of ended all of this, and it is the day that opens the epilogue of my book. The epilogue of my book is about that funeral. So when my editor was like, all right, late October, November, I said November 18th. That's it. That date is etched in my brain. It's got the same day as Waterloo, but it's November, and you have Wellington's funeral and sort of all of this both reasserting itself, but also fundamentally coming to an end. Right. And that's sort of what's going on here. Now, where I have lucked out enormously is that Sir Ridley Scott very kindly decided to release a Napoleon film at roughly the same moment.
Yeah, but according to Ridley Scott, only the first two books that were ever written about anything in history matter. So I'm very sorry, but according to Ridley, this book is irrelevant and so nobody should go and buy it. You can imagine my forthright response to that. But then you and I will sit down and discuss that at greater length in due course, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with that, and you're getting a preview of my thoughts, is that the first history of anything is inherently not history, it's propaganda. For one side or t'other. And you need space to get separation in order to get proper scholarship. So yeah, but yes, that aside, look, Napoleon is back in the psyche. He's back in the consciousness. It gave me the opportunity to write a wonderful little piece that you can find on my Twitter or my Instagram or whatever on Mr. Gomersall, who was the go-to Napoleon for the Hippodrama Battle of Waterloo, who, sort of, damn it, he took snuff on stage so that Joaquin Phoenix could lead a cavalry charge. So yeah, so that's really what it is. It's sort of, it was around, I needed a fall date, and November the 18th was there because it is Wellington's funeral. And it seemed a good way to bookend this, right? The hardback comes out on the day it starts, June 18th. The paperback comes out on the day it ends, November 18th.
That is very elegantly done. I am also rather ashamed that I didn't immediately realize that November 18th was Wellington's funeral. That's poor. That is very poor. But hey, why why shy away from my lack of knowledge, it would seem, on this show. It has been exposed cruelly many a time before and will continue to be well into the future. Folks, who owned Waterloo? Battle, Memory and Myth in British History 1815 to 1852. It is available in paperback right now. Go to Oxford University Press, and I believe we have a discount code. Am I right?
We absolutely do. It is Alpha Foxtrot Lima. Oh hell, what's the NATO alphabet for Y? Yankee Golf 6. So AAFLYG6 will net you 30% off, and that's quite a bargain because the paperback is retailing for £25, £24.99 in the UK, or $30 in the US, which I think gives us the advantage, actually, given the current exchange rates. But that's still going to take you down to about $20 or into the teens in terms of pounds. It's available right now, November 18th, 2023 in the UK. If you are in the US, I apologize. It takes a while I have to personally row the paperbacks across the Atlantic. So it's going to be either January 18th or February 18th. Depending on what website you go to, it seems to vary back and forth. And of course, with all of the problems, global supply chain shortages, paper, all of that, it may end up being early March even. But it is coming. It is cheaper. It's corrected. I caught errors that were in there. So this is the definitive version, at least until someone persuades me to do a second edition.
You know what? You might actually get a second edition. Normally, I would make a sarky comment about academic books and second editions and how rare they are. But yours is selling so well that you might actually get a second edition out of this in due course. Folks, make that happen. If you didn't go and buy the hardback, I do understand if you didn't go and buy the hardback.
So do I, to be clear. The hardback was absurd. It was absolutely absurd.
Yeah, don't tell your editor that. You realize that he'll probably listen to this and be unhappy with you.
He knows my views on this one. I have fought him tooth and nail. And in fairness, my editors at OUP have gone to bat for me over and over again. This is not an editorial thing. This is a higher price setting thing that has nothing to do with them. But yeah, no. Indeed.
But yeah, please, folks, come on, paperback, go get it. It's literally going to cost you like I can't do the maths. I'm very sorry, but let's say 16, 17, 18, 19 pounds. That's a decent Christmas gift right there. Go to OUP's website. That discount code once again was, Luke, FLYG6. That's Alpha Foxtrot Lima Yankee Golf 6, as in the number 6. Okay. Who owned Waterloo?
Who owned Waterloo? And it's going to come to, I'm just crunching the numbers, roughly around £18.
Come on,
with
people.
The discount code.
Come on. Surely the Napoleon assist in your life is worthy of that. Look, if you've been good this year, or even if you've been naughty this year, stick it on your list to Santa, and no doubt Santa will help you out and slip it into your stocking. Luke?
And I am more than happy, if you reach out to me, I'm more than happy to dispatch a signed book plate, so you can have a signed copy even if you've never met me, which is, in fairness, the recommended way to get a signed copy of an author's book, in most cases, mine included.
I won't comment, having met you before. Luke, it's an amusing point on which to end what has been an absolute riot of an episode. You'll be back very soon, but thank you for joining me. All the best with the paperback sales, and we will chat again about many things, perhaps less focus on memory, in fact, in the not too distant future.
I look forward to it, Zach. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for everyone who has listened throughout. I can imagine the number of your listeners who looked at this episode title, realized who was on it, and went, "Oh God, those two are at it again." So thank you so much. And please, if you've read it, if you enjoyed it, if you read it and you didn't enjoy it, reach out, let me know. If you didn't enjoy it, preferably reach out politely. I'm always happy to talk to those who have read it. And if you have questions, as always, I'm more than happy to answer.
Also, people, go leave a 5-star review on Amazon. Just
Oh
leaving
yes,
that in
please
there.
do, please do. It has it has 5 stars ratings, but no one's left a review yet, and I want words. So yes, that would help enormously.
Folks, if you're new here, remember to hit the subscribe button so that you can find your way back. And if you're loving the show, please remember to leave a review. It's the most powerful thing you can do to help the show reach a wider audience on our quest for 1 million downloads. Much love to all my Patreon supporters. Shout outs to my Mentioned in Dispatches patrons, Rob Griffith, Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Lucy Tatner, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Coulson, Jim Getz, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Mark Trowbridge, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, An Anonymous American, Martin Pisani, Ulrich Decado, James Fluick, Roger O'Donnell, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, David Graylick, Ted Andrews, David Milinsky, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon-Smith, Roland Shark, and Jason Morn. And the Admirals, John Haynes, Ryan Diamond, JC Kaiser, Bob Burnham, Mike Guest, Liam Telfer, Todd and Ned Campbell, Graham Goodwin, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Maxwell, David Priest, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Dan Hazelwood, Kate Walcombe, Steve Carter, and Clemens. I'll be back very soon, but until then, I'm Zach White. This has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.
Hey, it's Danny Pellegrino from Everything Iconic. Ready to upgrade your style game without blowing your budget? Check out Quince. They've got all the good stuff, shirts and polos, activewear, and fine leather goods, all at 50 to 80% less than other high-end brands. And the best part? They're all about safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing. Get that luxury vibe without the luxury price tag. Hit up quince.com/upgrade for free shipping and 365-day returns on your next order. That's quince.com/upgrade.